Well, I'll start from, it's an honor to be here. I do a lot of public speaking engagements if I don't have to travel very far. And this is well suited to my career. I'm a co-founder of Oculus VR. I no longer work there. I retired in 2015. And since that time, I funded a makerspace at UC Berkeley, along with Paul Jacobs. And we decided to integrate more hands-on approach to engineering with Cal's, UC Berkeley's, theoretical bent on things. So it's a hands-on makerspace, and we built it. It was completed in July of 2015. And there are courses taught there, mostly in making things, which is what we do there. And I'm a faculty member. Excuse me. So when I left Oculus, I built both Oculus's DK1 and DK2 headsets. I led the team, engineering team, and the manufacturing there. That was my job as a chief engineer. And I'm an engineer working mostly in video game space for about 30 years. And I've done a few other things. I did some stuff early on and I worked for the Department of Defense and decided to get out of that. I didn't like it and ended up in entertainment, which suits me well. So here's a little bit of my story here. Also, the key developer of Guitar Hero. I developed the Guitar Hero plastic guitars for Activision. We were acquired by Activision. I was a small startup company. Oculus was, as you well maybe know, is a startup company also. We started in 2012 on a Kickstarter campaign. And I knew nothing about Kickstarter when we did it. It didn't really appeal to me because I work in more traditional sort of funding arrangements with startup companies, but it kind of worked out well. It generated a lot of great PR. So I've done this in a bunch of other games. I worked in video games, the most recent Guitar Hero and Active. And then as I worked at Oculus, I was in charge of building their headsets for them. I've been doing this my whole life. I got it when I was 9 years old. I got a scholarship. And I don't really remember exactly what I did, but my mom saved this and gave it to me. But I think they got $1,000 or something like that. It was a lot of money back then. It's like 10,000 now, and it just sort of disappeared. I never got it. My mom probably spent it on groceries, to be honest. I'm also a Cal alumni. When I left Berkeley, I swore I'd never set foot in that place again. I was so ready to get out of there and get to work and create things. And then I ended up back there 30 plus years later, mostly because when I was at Oculus, I learned so much from young people. They have a different way of doing things now. And I do things by hand. They use 3D printers. I send stuff out to get machined. They machine it in-house. They're not particularly adept at using hand tools because that's what I grew up learning how to do. But I learned a lot from them, and I adapted their methods when I left Oculus. I have a lab, a research facility that I own with the staff. I use a lot of the stuff I learned there, and so it was a good experience for me. I had to resist the urge to parent them, though. I want to be their parent, don't do that, stop doing that. But didn't go over so well. Okay, so this is some of the stuff I've invented. That thing on the right, I actually didn't invent that, but the team did at Oculus, but I was involved with that. And the thing on the left there is a scrolling mouse that I built, and that was in 1987 using a PS2 because I wanted to go forward in a game, and so I took an IBM mouse there and stuck a wheel on it. And I don't think the buttons work very well, but that was the first attempt I did at doing that. And lo and behold, about 6 or 7 years later, it showed up on the market. I wish I had patented it. I didn't patent it. Didn't know about patents. After that, I patented everything I could do. So Oculus uses a camera positioned in front of your face, and there are active markers underneath infrared transparent plastic. And the markers are lit in a particular pattern, and that's what it uses to track your head position. It has some drawbacks. One of them is as you move far away from the camera, you lose resolution and your granularity decreases. So in other words, you move further away, it's hard to distinguish the dots and where your head is. So I endeavored to build a system, this is 2015, thereabouts, a couple years ago, and I succeeded. And then what happened was I got it working, and it's good for about 100 feet. So I can track a person in a room with 100 feet, and it uses a galvanometer, which is a small mirror, oscillating mirror on a piece of silicon. And I didn't build a mirror, I bought the mirror. I can't build a mirror. And what was I trying to do? I was trying to make a tracking system that I could therefore sell to someone like Sony. And, but what happened was the VR market is soft. I don't know if you're aware of the sales numbers. I kind of know what they are. I'll take that back. It's not soft. The mobile stuff, Samsung Gear VR was designed by Oculus. We built that for them. We didn't assemble it. They have their own factories, but it's our design. They sold 7 million of those. That's a smash hit. That also means I make my numbers, which is very good for me. But the PC side, not so great. And why is that? Well, that PC side, I mean the console side and PC side. Vive and Rift are both for PC gamers. They're slow to adopt. Those people that play PC games do not like change. You can't even change their monitor. They don't want you to touch any of their gear. They're very sensitive even to the controllers. You know, even a run of controllers that are supposed to be identical behave slightly differently, and they can detect that, believe it or not. We ran an experiment while I was at Activision to see what people can detect as far as latency. In other words, you push a button and the photons come out of the screen. What's the sensitivity? And it's 5 milliseconds. And we don't know why. When we added delay in there, it changed their game score. Their game score went down. And just don't know why, because it takes about 30 milliseconds for the nerve impulse to travel from your brain to your finger. How can that be? Well, it is. And we don't understand why that is exactly. But so this is called latency is very important. I'll just back up a little bit. I was attempting to sell this thing to someone like Sony, they're kind of they do their own stuff, and I don't know if they'd be interested. Then I was going to try to sell it as an accessory, and it was just a little company I was trying to do, but it didn't really work out. I still have the gear. So PC gamers are resistant to change. They don't like anything that requires them to change their hardware. They will change a GPU, and they will change the monitor to the latest IPS monitor, but they're resistant to it. And that's just the way it is. So when we try to sell into that market, the adoption rate's fairly low. There are only, as of 2016, 18 million gaming rigs in the world. That's 18 million total PCs that can play high-end games. So you're trying to sell into that. If you could get 10% of that, that's 2 million pieces. It's still not that great. It turns out that it's less than that. Both Vive and the Rift sold about 5% attach rate. So it was a little bit underwhelming. It turns out, though, that the VR market is actually mobile. That's what it is. It has drawbacks, obviously frame rate, screen resolution, these other things. That's what's selling. And if I were still in the VR business, I would be leaning towards that, and I would be on the application side, not on the hardware side, because it's a cell phone strapped to your face. So this is a couple of things that came up at Oculus when we were working on trying to get that latency. That's the time your head moves to the time your eyes saw the new image that was the result of your head moving. And it turns out it's about 15, 16 milliseconds. That's about as fast as you can go. And what's interesting about that is, and it's all self-contained. I mean, the PC's there, and the head mount's plugged into the PC. Why does it take so long? And because I can ping to New York on the internet in 5 milliseconds. I can go send an electron all the way to New York and all the way back in 5 milliseconds. Why can't I get my PC to do that, to lower the latency? And that's because of the architecture of the PC. It's just the way it was designed. It has history behind it. It's not the best hardware, but it is what people use for gaming. So we're kind of stuck with that. So everyone's thinking latency causes motion sickness. Motion sickness caused because your vestibular system is triggered wrong. In other words, your eyes see an image, but your ears feel something else. That'll make you sick. That gives you vertigo. It can give you vertigo. So the goal of Oculus in particular was to reduce the latency and reduce the motion sickness that people experience. So these kinds of things we kind of chased. One of them was latency, and it really doesn't affect you as much as the vestibular mismatch. And so in this project I was doing to try to sell to someone like Sony, I endeavored to try to fix a bunch of problems. And I only fixed 1 or 2 of those. I couldn't really write a game around it because I don't think I have the skill set to do that. I'm more a hardware guy. So I couldn't fix the scaling thing. I couldn't really control the content, but I could write a small demo app to try to demonstrate that I could get rid of motion sickness. There was an apple floating in a room, and you could go walk up to it. And this other thing is high refresh rate, high frame rates. That doesn't cause it either. I mean, certain gamers are sensitive to that. They're sensitive to it, but others aren't. I'm not that particularly sensitive to it. So, when you're playing in VR anyways, there's some accommodation that has to take place. In other words, you have to get accustomed to the game. And once you get kind of used to it, you stop getting it as nauseous. So I talked about what I built here, and what I did was I took a tiny little mirror. It's about the size of a pencil eraser, about the diameter of one, and I could position that thing, and I could point a laser against it and track an object in a room with high precision. And it was hooked to Bluetooth. I'll talk briefly about why your mobile experience is not so great. What we use, when you're doing the orientation in the mobile device, you're using the it's got a built-in gyroscope, 9DOF. It's got a gyroscope, accelerometer, and a magnetometer. When you're using that, you're primarily using the gyroscope. And the gyroscope, when you do translation, which means you move along an axis, it outputs 0. So you miss that gap, and that's an integration error. And that will make you sick, because your head is moving, but your eyes are not. The eyes don't see the scene moving. So this is DK2, which is primarily the same as the Rift. They're pretty similar. There's some differences in the display, but the technology is the same. And there's a little camera there, you can see it, and you clip that onto your monitor. And that's the marker approach. And what I tried to do was to build a solid-state version of HTC Vive's system. And that's me over at Berkeley fooling around with the Vive there about a couple years ago. I don't see the video running. I'm sorry about that, folks. This is some of the things I experimented with, trying to determine whether or not I could find a position of a photo sensor in a room. Took apart a laser printer and pulled the scanner out of it, and that worked. It was a line laser, wrote a line laser horizontally. And this is the reverse engineering of Valve's Lighthouse approach. Basically, there's a mirror on a motor spinning around, and it's a line laser, and it sweeps the line laser across the room, high frequency. And this is another thing I built, which is a Galvo scanner. I actually bought that on eBay, but I tried to get it to work and see if I could track someone with it, and you can. It's just mechanical and messy, and it's not cheap. And this is another approach I took, which was a pico projector, a laser pico projector, and a photo sensor. I experimented with trying to find out, and this actually worked really well. But I just chose not to use a pico projector because I can't source one. So I concluded that the Valve system is computationally simple. Uses timing, it's very straightforward. And these are the other things that you need to do: eliminate the scaling effect and the audio modeling. I feel that the audio portion of it is ignored in trying to figure out, get rid of these aspects of motion sickness and vestibular sickness in VR. I'll talk just briefly about another project I'm working on. I quit working on this thing. I'm working on a vehicle right now. You hear a lot about, driverless cars and so forth. I'm not actually doing that, but I'm building a vehicle that has the ability to fix a particular problem. How many people here, if they don't want to admit it, don't look at their cell phones when they're driving? I do. I want to fix that problem because I passed a car this morning that had rear-ended another car, and there was a young man standing out there. I just assumed he was looking at his phone and crashed. It may not be, but I want to fix that. I think there's a viable business there. And I started it trying to figure out, first of all, I built the car at my facility. I should never have done that. I should have just bought a car. But I wanted to put it in a race car because I had been at McLaren in the UK in June of 2016. And I went through this whole thing looking at their cars and so forth. And I talked to their Formula One. I talked to them about Formula One. Formula One is those little tiny cigar-shaped cars they drive around on the track, and they're real fast. I go, what does a driver do when he's driving a Formula One car? Because it's got a steering wheel with all these buttons and stuff on it, and there's a little display there. And the chief engineer at McCauley said, well, some of the drivers look at the steering wheel, but most of them don't have time because they have to look down, and then their eyes have to look up and reaccommodate. I mean, this is a different focal length than what they're looking out at, which is infinity. And it's 5-10 milliseconds, but the cars are so quick that's kind of dangerous. And most drivers just get in there and drive the thing. So I said, what if I could put the markers, the aspects that the driver needs to trim on the car and floating out in front of the car, outside the vehicle. And so that's where this project grew out of. So we built a vehicle, it's a race car, and it's the biggest part of the project, it turns out, because I way underestimated the amount of work it would take to do that. All the vehicle dynamics, all that stuff. And then the augmented part of it is a monocle that you wear, and I found one in Israel. It's HDMI in, which means you can plug it into a PC if you wanted to. And the monocle sits out in front of one eye, and I'm floating the cues, the markers for the driver out in front of the vehicle. And what's the use in that? Well, if I can float a marker out in front of the vehicle, I can also, I'll wrap it up here. I can also put music or whatever else I want to do out there. And therefore, the kid's not going to be looking at his phone and driving. But thank you, I'm out of time. I have time for about one question, if anyone wants to ask a question.
First of all, thank you very much. So,
awesome. And we have a question.
Yes, sir?
Do you think the display depth will cause the motion sickness?
The display depth?
Yeah, the lack of the display of depth.
It has depth. Because I didn't cue into that part, but I have to leave here briefly. But basically, the localization system I'm leaving can track your head and your eyes. I have that. That's part of the vehicle. So that sits out on the roll bar in front, and that'll keep track of your head and your eyes. And when you turn your head, the object stays fixed in position. Does that answer your question? Yeah. It has depth. Just an interesting thing. If you're looking at a tree that's a mile away, it doesn't matter that it's 2D because you're still going to see a tree that's in 2D, even if it's in 3D. You see, but the closer you get, the more, I can get into the details of that with you if you want. But maybe we should talk after the thing.
Yeah, we definitely need to get you up in the developer track, I think, is one of those places where also this would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much again. So,
thank you.
Yeah, exactly.